Professor Sam McConkey. Now, listening to that conversation also was Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, what do you make of this business of air bridges to countries with levels similar to our own?
I'm not really sure what's going on. It's quite convoluted and unclear, and everything that the people who are supposed to be directing this says makes it even more confusing and unclear. The notion overnight that they would be updated every fortnight would make any sort of coherent strategic plan to international travel impossible, because any flight that you've booked could suddenly put you in breach of the DFA regulation a few days before you fly out. And let's be clear on this, the flights are already proceeding. There's a big disconnect, Pat, between what's being talked about air bridges. We'll open up travel to these places. Already there will be 35 flights out of Dublin Airport today. It was down to 12 at its worst, and next Wednesday that will increase exponentially. A lot of people have decided to travel while the government is saying, oh, let's reopen travel. It's already happening because they can't stop it happening.
Yeah. The other concern you'd have is that you have an air bridge between whatever countries are nominated based on their level, but then if they have open borders, in other words, you can drive right through continental Europe from one country to the next, you've got people maybe coming from countries with higher levels of infection populating the resorts in those countries, and you're mixing with them. I'm not sure the air bridge thing is thoroughly thought through.
It started as travel bubbles. Australia and New Zealand proposed one. Then the Baltic states decided to do one among themselves, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. That's when Margarita Skinas brought up the European plan, because Europe didn't react very coherently to the arrival of coronavirus in Italy. And we saw borders closing, like the France-Germany land border, something I never thought I'd see closed in my life. So in response to that, they decided that we should have a coherent reopening of borders, which more or less happened June the 15th, Monday last week. So what some countries, and Britain was one of the first to jump on this, and I think this is a sort of a drip down into the Irish political mentality. Let's set up air bridges with countries we've picked and chosen. What we've seen with the start of that hasn't been filling us with confidence. It tends to be political rather than based on medicine. If you were to use, for instance, the metrics that the Germans use, which is the cumulative incidence of the last 7 days, there would be four red countries in the whole of Europe on Ireland's list. They would be Bulgaria, Romania, Poland and Sweden. Poland hugely significant because of the 80,000 or so Poles that live in Ireland. So what we're getting from the metrics, the Spanish would have used a 14-day metric, and even fewer countries on that. What we're getting from the countries that are talking about the air bridges is there aren't that many countries that are excluded. And the second thing is they don't actually talk about air bridges with the countries that are clean. They talk about, we have these measures, they're lifted, but they're reimposed in the case of 2 or 3 countries. That, to me, with my knowledge of the aviation industry and what internationally is happening, or within Europe is happening, is more significant, makes more sense than the rhetoric of we're going to set up air bridges with safe countries. And there are very safe countries out there. Germany inbound would be a terrific country to set up an air bridge for us. Lanzarote outbound would be perfect. There's been no cases for 3 weeks. But I don't see this, I see this almost as a sideshow, while the Irish consumer and the Irish aviation industry has put the planes back in the sky. Turkish started this week. Romania is one of those red lists. There's a flight to Cluj leaving in 2 hours' time, another one to Bucharest tomorrow. The flights are already in place while the politicians are talking about this, and it does look like a lot of optics while the real return to travel is happening anyway.
I know that you travel a lot in a normal year. Would you happily travel to any of these countries yourself?
Absolutely. You've got my background and what I've seen and what I've experienced down the years has been flying in atmospheres of real fear. You and I did an interview on another station in 2009 when I was caught in the H1N1 outbreak in Mexico and the panic that ensued. And I was on one of the last flights to Europe because all the flights were being cancelled back out of Mexico then. I've flown through Africa at a time of real fear with Ebola, which is not the same as COVID, but has some similarities with a much higher death rate. And the world is used to dealing with that. When you fly, you're in danger. I mean, we've 16 TB cases, unusually, in Ireland in the last week. 1.5 million people still die of TB worldwide. So the world, when you're travelling in it, you see countries fighting medical emergencies of various degrees. Usually the poorest countries have the worst scenarios. So when I'm looking at the great hullabaloo about the reopening of travel and the face masks and all of the, will we allow someone from another country in? It does depress me because it seems to be that we've ignored all the progress that has been made in the medical benefits and the economic. And let's face it, opening borders has medical benefits, huge medical benefits. All those benefits of the last 50 years are being disregarded in a sense of panic, which wouldn't be out of place back in the 14th century. And the decisions made by politicians in the 14th century, in the time of the Black Death, are much the same. Pulling up the drawbridge is an easy decision to make. Deciding when to let it back down again is a difficult one. Our offshore islands, for instance, are perfectly COVID clear and they're not sure. Will they follow the government guidance? One of them voted against following government guidance to reopen. When do you let the drawbridge back down again? And the good news is the European Union has drawn up a coherent plan to do this within Europe, which will manage safety. And Ireland is busily ignoring it. The scenes you're talking about, the beaches, that's not going to happen because it's managed, Pat. The Spanish have put in squares, nets across their beaches, 4 people within a space. They brought in traceability. Locator forms, by the way, our quarantine is way out of place, but locator forms are normal across Europe so that you can trace, if there's a case, you can trace everyone on the aircraft. The number of people in a pool is going to be managed. The number of people in restaurants, the way the food is served is going to be managed. So an incoherent sort of opening of the borders and everyone becoming vectors of the disease once more isn't going to happen under this plan. The problem is everybody in Europe is following this plan and we seem to be caught up in little side arguments which have little to do, which are following local medical opinion in many cases rather than the central opinion from the World Health Organization and from Brussels.
Okay. We will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Pat.
Editor of Air and Travel Magazine, thank you very much for joining us.